Okay, good evening from the United Kingdom and welcome to this session, Commission 7 session of the Working Group on Responsible Public-Private Partnerships in Land Administration. My name is John Meadows and I'm a Land Administration Consultant working for Land Equity International based out of Wollongong in Australia. But currently, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, I find myself stranded in a village in the west of England. I'm joined by my colleague Kate Fairley, who is the rapporteur for this. Kate is a colleague at Land Equity and has the job of both acting as rapporteur and as a presenter for this session. Just a few words by way of introduction from myself, and then I will introduce the speakers and the presentations. I have now acquired some 41 years of land administration experience, and I can just about remember starting my career with Her Majesty's Land Registry in London in 1980, which seems a long, long time ago. And it was while working for the Land Registry in London that I first became aware of public-private partnerships, this concept of PPPs. And of course, my formative years of working coincided with the prime ministership of Margaret Thatcher, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. And she's oft-cited as one of the architects of the public-private partnership concept. And it was during the 1990s that I found myself managing several large PPP contracts that the Land Registry in London had in response to the prevailing policy that was being put forward by the government. We'd entered into with a number of private sector technology partners. So I was working initially on a large digitization project and then on a major information communications technology refresh project, both under PPP arrangements. And it was very much the transition to the digital age that brought with it the perfect environment in which PPPs could thrive, be tried, tested. And of course, this made way for today's digital land administration systems. But I think things have moved on, and I think we will see during today's sessions that PPPs are being considered and applied in a wide range of contexts and for different purposes, with continuous learning and new thinking emerging. And from my perspective, PPP arrangements have provided the impetus and innovation that I think, based upon my own experience, if things were left purely to the public sector, that may well have been lacking. But of course, PPPs have also brought with them a need to ensure that they are fairly awarded, that they offer value for money, they serve the wider public, and while at the same time acknowledging the fact that where you have private companies involved, then commercial realities have to be considered. I'm sure that we're going to have a fruitful discussion during this session. Just a couple of things to mention. There is a poll in which a question has been posed about the future of public-private partnerships in land administration. As I just said by way of introduction, things have certainly moved on since the early days of when I was involved in PPPs in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And I've been away from this for a while and was left wondering after reading the papers today and reflecting on those papers, whether things have actually moved on and whether the form of PPPs or the form that PPPs are now taking has changed in any way. So the poll is really looking at the participants' views towards the ongoing utilization of public-private partnerships, whether they remain largely unchanged, the concept is fairly static, whether they've evolved with a greater focus on matters such as social responsibility and environmental sustainability, or whether in fact they're now being overtaken by new models of collaboration and partnership. So I encourage you to answer the poll, very straightforward, very easy to do, so that we can canvass people's views on public-private partnerships. Now, we have 5 presentations in today's session. all touching on different themes, really, different aspects of PPP. And we have the first presentation is going to be by Kenneth Noor from Denmark, and that's going to touch on private sector responsibility in supporting sustainable development. Now, just by way of introduction, this presentation and the accompanying paper consider a new strategic context in which the private land sector and land professionals can, in the context of PPPs, take and apply a corporate social responsibility approach to a new level that goes beyond UN Global Compact principles and makes a positive contribution to SDGs. The presentation proposes that this is not only the right thing to do, but can bring genuine social and economic benefits in the context of developing countries, while providing growth opportunities for the private companies so engaged. So without further ado, Kenneth, I will hand over to you for this opening presentation on this session on responsible PPPs in land administration. Thank you very much.
And thank you, John. And thank you to FIG for giving me the opportunity to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. I will address 3 topics: corporate social responsibility, also named as CSR, talent management, and business development. The way I see the Sustainable Development Goals is like, if you know the Kinder Egg, you have some chocolate, you have a piece of toy, and then I think the last one will be joy. But it will be up to you to define which is which here. I will talk about working with the Sustainable Development Goals in a strategic perspective. So I'll just share my screen. And I hope that I can't hear anything, but I hope that you can see my screen now. Is that correct? As John said, this is about the Sustainable Development Goals, but also about creating sustainable organizations. If we look into the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 17, partnership, is really, really important. We only have 9 years until 2030, so we need to partner up, but we also need to speed up. And one of the key elements in speeding up is the collaboration between governments, institutions, people, NGOs, and the private sector. And that partnership is really crucial. I think that if we join forces, we will be able to make it happen, even though we only have 9 years to go. Here I have listed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I will not go through each of these goals. They are presented in other sessions. But one of the things that is really, really important here is that land is fundamental if we want to eradicate and eliminate poverty and hunger. At least 8 out of the 17 are related to land management, land policy, and cadastre. So now we'll talk about my first topic, which is corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility has been on the agenda in most organizations for a decade now. And everybody, more or less, is committed into the Global Compact principles when it comes to environment, human rights, anti-corruption, child labor, etc. But we need to do more now. We need to take it into a more strategic and higher level working with CSR. Today it's common that everybody is working with it. And we can use the SDGs to do that. Because if we put the SDGs strategically into the way that we run our businesses, both in the short run, but also in the long run, we will be able to have another strategic and even more important focus on corporate social responsibility. And everybody could ask, why is that? Well, that's because it's a fact that if we look into our organizations today, we are being evaluated more or less every day on the way that we handle corporate social responsibility. Internally by employees, but also externally by our shareholders, by other parties. It could be vendors, suppliers, etc. So we really need to focus and take CSR serious again. I'm not saying that we're not taking it serious, but we can do even more, and we do need to do it even better. From a management perspective, well, the SDGs asked a lot of things about our business, and it put on a demand where we need to go even further. We need to cover up and handle corporate social responsibility, but there are also other things that we can use the SDGs to. The SDGs is a really, really fine catalyst when it comes to innovation and growth. We can use it for talent management, both when we talk about the foundation, the employees that we have today, but also the future, the employees that we are going to attract. Even though if we are a governmental institution, organization, or a private company, we need to do some kind of financial performance, not only on a revenue-based performance, but it could also be on a cost performance and branding as well. So when we look into the SDGs, it is a gift for every organization. We just need to do more about it and make sure that it's incorporated into our strategy. Our challenges, we have a lot of challenges, but we also could turn them the other way around and say, what is the opportunities when it comes to the SDGs? I've talked about attractive and sustainable organization, but we should also address disruption. We're living in a world where digitalization is the mover everywhere. Processes that we do manually today is being digitalized, but also software and other things that we are working with. It could be GIS, land surveying equipment, etc. So we need to take disruption into account as well. And we can use goal number 17, partnership, to that. By going together with competitors or other organizations that we haven't been working with before, we can disrupt the way that we are doing things, and by that speed up the process, securing that all poverty is eradicated in 2013. But the next topic, and this is number 2, the first one was corporate social responsibility. This is about the youth. This is about talent management, the young generation of people that we're going to employ at some time. What really makes the difference in any organization is skilled and talented people. And I guess and assume that we have all recruited the wrong person into our organization. But when we get the right person in, we know exactly what we want to recruit the next time as well. But the young people today, they want more than remuneration. They want to be a part of an organization that makes a difference. It's not enough just to make a donation. They want to invest a part of themselves into an organization that is not only talking about the sustainable development goals, but also doing something about it. When we have people at job interviews, they ask about values, our vision, and corporate social responsibility. What is you actually doing? And then if we go down to the preliminary schools, well, that's common knowledge and language. The young people today, they will have the SDGs as a tool, and they will continue to ask questions about it. So we had to relate on it also when it comes to having the right organization in place. What else can we do with the SDGs? And this is not about boosting employee engagement, talent career development, etc. That is item or topic number 2. But the third thing that we could use the SDGs for is new business and growth. If we take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, there is 169 sub-goals that we can use for business development. And I'm quite sure that if we took these 169 things that are described as sub-goals and presented them to our business development department, I'm sure that they would smile, because it's really a good innovation catalog for things that we could do in the future and that we might not be doing today. So my conclusion is around the SDGs that we should see it as a strategic tool, and we should have it deep into the way that we run our business. And that's regarding corporate social responsibility, the ability to attract and retain people, but also developing new business. And I'll give you a short example on how we're doing it in LE34. This is just a slide that I will not go through. If you want to know more about LE34, you can go into our homepage or look at the presentation afterwards. The way we do it is that we see ourselves as an SDG 1, 2, and 17 company. And that means that when we look into the world, there are some facts around constitutional rights and secured rights to land. 70% of the world's population do not have these rights to land that we see as a normal thing in Europe and other places, and things that we take for given when we buy a house or rent a facility or buy an asset. So secured rights gives access to trading of land, assets, financing of land, and create a foundation for social and economic growth. So the short version and the story that I would like to share here is that if we take a developing country, where's the incentive for a farmer to produce more and better food if we do not have these secured rights or titles? If we have the titles and the secure rights to land in place, there will be an incentive to produce more and better food. And that is directly aiming into goal number 2. Producing more foods means that we will eliminate or eradicate hunger in the world. If we are capable of producing more and better food, this will also affect trade and finance, because there will be an economic growth. People will start buying and sharing food for money, and the same goes with the land. And that has an impact directly into goal number 1, which is no poverty. This is a strategic wheel. I only have 2 slides left. This is a strategic wheel that we use in everything we do in LE34. So all of these items here is items where we say that if we want to be sustainable in the long run, we should be or strive to be second to none in all of these elements. And what we do when it comes to major strategic products, we can put, as I have done it here, the sustainable development goals in the middle of the strategic wheel. And if we work with the sustainable development goals, then we can say that the ultimate vision for LE34 and other organizations is to secure that we eradicate poverty and hunger by 2030. And we take the single elements in the strategic wheel, you can see that we have an academy. What we can use the sustainable development goals to is to educate and attract employees. We can use it for innovation, as I said. It could be new markets, but it could also be new products. We can use it to secure that we have a proud one company culture within our company. We have more than 400 employees, and they are really proud. We're not only talking about working with the sustainable development goal, we are doing it, and we are doing it with a strategic perspective. We use it for branding as well. The branding is important for us. We have had contracts in Europe where we have got new assignments due to the fact that we could demonstrate that we were working strategically with the SDGs and we were making a difference. We can also use it in terms of growth and goals and be sustainable in the long run. And then we have corporate social responsibility, which is an element in our strategic wheel, and that has a perfect match when it comes to corporate social responsibility. The last slide, that's my wrap up. Well, we have a young generation out there. We need to handle them. We need to employ them, but they have a new standard and demand for who they want to work with. We need to cope with that. We also need to develop our employees and our organizations, and we can use the SDGs to differentiate us in the market, both when it comes to customers, but also when it comes to employees. We can use the SDGs to bring CSR into a new strategic level. I've shown you that, I talked about it, and by that make our organization sustainable in the long term. At last here, I would say that I was talking about organizations, but I would also like to address that I think that the biggest impact on the SDGs and the way that we handle our world today comes from individual people. So it's plus 7 billion people just make a small effort to do something that is good for this world, then it would make a huge impact. So this was my 3-in-1 approach, where you can use the sustainable development goals in terms of corporate social responsibility, talent management, and business development. And from my view, this is 3 items that is going to make a difference for the organizations that are going to really make a difference in the future. So that was my presentation. Thank you, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for that very interesting presentation. I have to say, it's certainly given me a slightly different perspective on the SDGs as a strategic framework. We tend to just park them to one side sometimes and think, compartmentalize them. But it certainly was an interesting presentation. I also like the fact that you've picked up on this point about young talented professionals and the demands that they're making of companies in terms of companies adhering to corporate social responsibility principles and putting the talk into practice, which is very encouraging to hear. So thank you very much. Thank you for sticking to the time frame. We've got some more presentations, so we will move on and come back during the discussion. Thank you. So, let's move then to our second presentation, which is by Søren Brand Pedersen on public-private partnerships as a catalyst for tenure governance in developing countries. We're going to cover, in this presentation, Søren is going to be considering PPPs as a catalyst for tenure governance and presenting the SDGs as a holistic approach to sustainability that ultimately requires cooperation between governments, businesses and citizens. And I guess this is going to be a little bit inspired by the Danish experience. And I think with some reference to, I think you referred to it as the constellation of PPPs, which I like that phrase. So I will be quiet and I will hand over the floor to Søren for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'll go straight to the presentation. So I will share my screen. So, yes, hello everyone. My name is Søren Brand Pedersen, and I will present this paper regarding public-private partnerships as a catalyst for tenure governance in developing countries. I'm working with land management and tenure rights in LE34, and for more than 200 years we have been working to secure property rights in Denmark and Scandinavia. In this presentation I will tell why we believe that public-private partnerships is the way forward. We are convinced that by using public-private partnerships we can utilize know-how from the private sector, and this will provide us with better task solutions. This will also contribute to build up knowledge in land-related tasks, both in the public and the private sector. And it will contribute to easier up and down scaling when tasks have to start up and get implemented in the public administration. We all know the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The realization of the goals is a huge challenge, and it can seem difficult to reach the goals within 2030. But the SDGs are also a great opportunity for everybody, as it sets the world's most urgent problems on a common agenda, and actually help companies like ours to see ourselves contributing to achieve the goals, as it addresses the specific problems and give us all a good platform to see how we can contribute for a better world. Regarding our profession, handling land administration and securing tenure rights, goal number 1, no poverty, and goal number 2, zero hunger, are essential, especially the action-oriented underlying target 1.4 and target 2.3 is dealing with the land issue. Target 1.4 states that by 2030, the goal is to ensure that all men and women have equal rights to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, etc. And target 2.3 states that by 2030, the goal is to double the agricultural productivity and incomes of small-scale food producers through secure and equal access to land. So from the SDGs, we know that securing rights to land is an essential task for poverty alleviation and fighting hunger, and therefore establishing land administration systems in developing countries is a vital task that must be prioritized. Establishing and adapting the necessary institutional conditions are crucial parameters for the basic conditions to be in place, and directly linked to the institutional considerations are the legal measures to ensure that the establishment of the system are legislatively adapted to the desired setup. Establishing the spatial mapping of boundaries is the basic physical action for identifying ownership. And the spatial mapping of regions and ultimately entire countries can seem overwhelming and a huge task in a government administration that has not previously organized and handled these tasks. Providing and training the necessary local labor can be a challenge for the establishment of the system, and also the ongoing operation and maintenance of the system. The necessary capacity building can be a challenge and a limiting factor. And this can be crucial for the use of the system and for ensuring that the systems do not become outdated, so the investment is wasted. As an example on how comprehensive use of the private sector in establishing, operating, and developing a land administration system, I will shortly introduce you to the Danish cadastral system. The land administration system in Denmark is developed over more than 200 years, and its initial purpose was property valuation and taxation to create an income for society. But the system has continuously been adapted to meet the changing requirements in society, and all the way it has been with an extensive use and collaboration with the private sector. The Danish cadastral system is built up in the public sector, and the Danish Geo Agency here at the left is responsible for the registration in the cadastral register. But as you can see on the slide, it is the private chartered land surveyor who, determined by law, has the central role in all property changes. And that includes the initial contact with the landowner, the surveying, obtaining necessary permits, handling easements and mortgages, and all other necessary agreements with neighbors and other stakeholders. And when everything is set and in place, the Geodata agency is requested to make the final registration. So there's a close cooperation between the public and the private sector in the ongoing handling of cadastral changes, but also in maintaining and developing the cadastral IT systems. The use of private sector services has played a major role. From the early 90s, private companies have been digitizing the cadastral maps, and from around 2000, the Geodata agency started to develop the cadastral registration towards a fully digitized system. And this huge task has been ongoing for several years and has all the way been executed by private companies. And this in close collaboration with the Geodata agency to develop the best solution for the future system. In addition to the data created in the cadastre and the land registry, the Danish land administration system also includes a series of administrative property data in national and municipal registers. These data is available free of charge, and as a service, a public information server is established to provide landowner and land professionals free access to data regarding properties and land. And this also secures a good transparency of the system. So data from these registers, which are established on the basis of a close cooperation between the public and the private sector, now gives the private land professionals the possibility to take advantage of the information for other services, for example, real estate consultancy, IT solution, or GIS applications, etc. And also important in this context is that the registries and administrative systems related to land, for example, land use administration and building permits, over the years has created thousands of jobs in both the public and the private sector. This telling about the Danish cadastral system, just for your inspiration. In a public-private partnership constellation, politicians and government officials can determine the policies and maintain control of the development. The task for the public sector will be to determine the institutional and legal basis and the framework for the system, and then explore the possibilities of obtaining the necessary services in the private sector. Establishing and developing the land administration system can be done in close cooperation with private companies, both as individual companies or in a constellation of more companies supplementing each other. The basic spatial mapping and registration can be based on a simple mapping method using aerial imageries or drones, and collaboration with private companies performing these tasks can be an obvious solution. Cooperation agreements can be concluded in different ways according to local conditions, either as a bilateral agreement with a single company, or the task can be offered between several companies. And the selection criteria may, in addition to price and execution time, be the company's description of a task solution and their experiences from similar tasks. The necessary framework and conditions for the delivery must be established and a control function organized, which at an appropriate level checks whether the deliveries meet the stated standards or not. This should be evaluated and continuously adjusted based on experience. So the advantage of using public-private partnerships are obvious. The public authority can maintain the control and the establishment and operation of the land administration system, while at the same time utilize from the flexibility of the private sector, where there is a natural focus on developing business models and services that meets the demand. Using public-private partnership efficiently will innovate the task performance, and it will contribute to easy up and downscaling when tasks have to start up and get implemented in the public administration. And finally, this will also contribute to build up local labor and knowledge in land-related tasks, both in the public and the private sector. So with the public sector on this drawing as the bigger gear, the use of public-private partnerships can have a positive impact on the private sector and civil society in general. Establishing land administration system in a public-private partnership constellation is not only securing property rights. The land-related registers can create a large number of jobs in the private land and real estate sector, which, in addition to performing the basic cadastral and land registry functions, also undertake a wide range of other geo-related and legal services. And as a natural consequence of this, even more jobs will emerge in both the public and the private sector, which again will lead to a demand for higher educational level and specific skills. And finally, this will in many ways lead to an increase of the value of society in general. Yes. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Søren. Thank you very much for that presentation, and thank you for keeping to the time frame. It's very difficult to say all that you want to say in 10 to 12 minutes, but I appreciate that. I mean, thank you again for reinforcing the strong link between land administration and the SDGs. You mentioned 1.4 and 2.3 specifically, and it's very clear that land administration plays a fundamental role in taking those SDGs towards fruition. It was also, I liked the reference to the Danish experience, and of course the constellation of PPPs that you mentioned, and the role of various partners. And I think, even in the short time that you were able to present, you were demonstrating, how you can bring together these various parties, the expertise and the knowledge of the various parties to contribute towards something that has positive societal impact, is the theme you ended upon. So thank you very much for your presentation. I would encourage those that are participating in this session, and I don't think I can see how many people have joined, but please post your questions for the Q&A part of the session. So we've got 3 more presentations, and then we will have a question and answer session at the end. So I would encourage anyone who's listening in that has burning questions to ask of our presenters. We've had 2 great presentations so far from Kenneth and Søren. Please post your questions, and we'll look at as many as we can at the end of the presentation sessions. So I'm now going to call upon the 3rd presenter, and this is Kate Fairley, my colleague from Land Equity International, who stayed up well into the night in the far reaches of New South Wales. I think I've got that right, or is it Victoria?
Close, Victoria, yeah.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure.
And technically it's morning too, John, so
Okay, okay, you've got me on the technicality. So Kate is going to talk about maybe an element of PPPs that isn't often talked about in these fora, and but of course it's critically important for private companies and its shareholders, and that's aspects related to commercial feasibility and financing options for the use of PPPs in the land administration sector. I will say no more and hand over to Kate for the presentation. Thank you very much, Kate.
Thanks very much, John. And I'm hoping that my lovely Dutch colleague will post my slides for me. And you'll have to excuse me saying next slide occasionally when I ask her to move it through. So I'll just pause. I have actually promised my other presenters that I'll hopefully go a little bit under 10 minutes. So we'll see if I can achieve that at all. All right, so the slide should be coming up shortly. So John's introduced me anyway. My name's Kate Fairley, and I'm presenting this paper on behalf of both the team at LEI, who contributed to writing the paper, as well as our co-contributors, Planet Partnerships. The presentation is, of course, how to conceptualize the PPP for land administration services. And I think we've had some really interesting presentations from LE34 colleagues, Kenneth and Søren. And this one will probably go down a bit more of a mainstream PPP line in terms of looking at commercial feasibility. But for the FIG audience, it's a little bit different in terms of we typically focus on what the government should be looking at. And this will be focusing on the relationship between government and private sector and that question of commercial feasibility. And for those of you who have come across it, the World Bank recently published their public-private partnerships and land administration documents, the analytical and operational frameworks. And this covers a lot of material that is published in those. So if you've already read them, then you know what I'm going to say. In particular, there's a land conceptualization tool under the operational framework, and that's the aspect that I'm particularly going to be focusing on. So the next slide, please. So let's start with what is a PPP. And to some extent, my Danish colleagues have targeted this a little bit. And hopefully you've also read the paper, so it's already clear. PPPs are formal cooperative partnerships that exist between one or more government entities and one or more private sector entities. And they typically involve the sharing of risks, the sharing of rewards, and the sharing of responsibilities. And the extent to which they do this effectively defines the type and the style of the PPP contract, as well as the remuneration and the profit share that's agreed. In principle, PPPs in land administration services should be pretty much the same as comparative PPPs, typically what we'd see in the e-governance or ICT sectors. But I guess what we say in the paper is that there's two key elements that seem to make land administration service PPPs different. Or we suggest that there's at least two elements. And these are, one, the stewardship nature of land governance, so that land is governed by long-standing legislative frameworks as well as traditional practices, and that it's inherently political and social with a range of values and relationships that exist around land. And whilst these exist when we're talking about, for example, highway infrastructure, road infrastructure, port infrastructure, they don't exist to the same degree that they do with land administration systems. And then the second point that sets land PPPs apart is really the variation that exists across land administration service approaches. To some extent, there's no plug and play for land administration. We have either title or deed systems. We have the extent to which systems are decentralized, the extent to which systems might cover the whole of the country or just a small part, the extent of digitalization, and so on. So there's so much variation that it's quite difficult to just talk about a single land PPP. There's so much variation. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, with we're saying it's so incredibly complex, why would we consider a PPP? And Soren, to some extent, has already gone into this, so I'll be quite brief. Really, we're talking about bringing in the private sector to help with capital, financing, technology, innovations, or efficiency. So it might be a way for governments to, in particular, bring in short-term additional financing or bring in short-term additional skills or expertise. And it's also, typically governments we consider are not so good at upgrading technology. So that's another aspect. But we particularly highlight in the paper that there's three considerations that governments in particular should really focus on when looking at PPPs. And these are whether or not there's prior experience in doing a PPP. So for example, whether there's existing legislation in place. Is the existing land administration service well established to the extent that private sector can see the value and the potential return on investment? And is there a culture of formal registration? To what extent is the public, the citizens, going to buy in? And again, Soren, I think, touched on that when he talked about sort of this three key players in public-private partnerships. It's not just government and the private sector, it is also to some extent the public. All right, next slide, please. Now, I mentioned the land conceptualization tool that sits underneath the operational framework that I mentioned in this World Bank document. And this tool provides a framework and a set of guiding questions for structuring, developing, and evaluating a land PPP concept. I've listed the range of topics here that we cover in that land conceptualization tool. And really the key point I want to make here is that there's a lot of effort and a lot of data that needs to go into the concept development. It's not just a case of saying, yep, we should do a land PPP. There's a lot of due diligence that should be done. And that will ultimately prevent problems later on. All right, next slide. Okay, so this slide is effectively the core of what I want to talk about. PPPs need to be attractive to the commercial sector, the commercial providers, sorry. And if the project has significant economic, social, or environmental impact, governments might wish to consider additional support to improve the commercial feasibility, or basically to make it more attractive to the private sector. So land PPP concepts to date have largely centered around government, but fundamentally PPPs need to be attractive to the private sector, to operators and to investors. And if there isn't this commercial feasibility, we really need to look to other ways to make it attractive. So there's two aspects to this, and we suggest that some form of feasibility study is needed. And this should include financial modeling to confirm that project inflows can cover project outflows, recognizing also that the private sector will likely expect some level of profit. So this in turn informs the selected payment mechanism, be it a user pays approach, a government pays approach, or a hybrid of the two. And then the assessment of commercial feasibility, considering the perspective of debt providers, or whether the project profits can service the project debt, and the perspective of equity providers, or whether the project can meet minimum return expectations. So there's two aspects to that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so hopefully I haven't rushed through it too quickly, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet, and obviously the paper is the key thing, or if you're really a glutton for punishment, then the full analytical operational frameworks developed by the World Bank. Effectively, the key messages are that PPPs are not just about the private sector, and they're not just about government. The interests of both really do need to be considered, and as I did mention, the public needs to as well, to the extent to which they have already bought into the land administration service or system. Investors and private partners will expect a reasonable rate of return, especially if considering additional risk, and as well as in the context of opportunities to invest elsewhere. So if you have a very well-established land administration service or system, then the investment in the private partner might be relatively easy to find, and it might be easy for them to determine their return. But if you don't have such a well-established land administration system, then that's where additional remuneration or incentive might be required. And that's something that I know that the World Bank and other partners are certainly looking at in terms of making this in bridging that relationship between the public sector and the private sector. So I guess the key message, a land PPP needs a clear concept, data, and a clear business case that underpins commercial viability. And my final sentence, having these in place will increase market interest and the chances of a successful and competitive bidding process. Thanks very much for listening, and I really hope that there's some questions and comments to come. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kate. Sorry for the slight delay while I unmute.
No worries.
Always a slight technical hitch with that. No, thanks very much for that. In many respects, there were a lot of PPP fundamentals, I think, that you covered in that very short presentation, but very important. And I certainly, your last slide, which touched upon those key messages about clear concepts, about having evidence data as an evidence base for a PPP, and then generating maybe a broader market interest. I think I could have done with that slide maybe 25, 30 years ago when I was first managing a PPP contract, and certainly, scope of the contract and some of the issues that arose because of a lack of some of those points you've made in terms of clarity of concept and having hard data caused many problems in those early days. And there perhaps weren't the range of vendors that you were inferring in the last point you made about trying to broaden market interest in PPPs and make them more attractive. So thank you very much for that presentation. It's certainly added to the previous presentations and built upon what Kenneth and Soren have shared with us. Thank you very much,
John.
Kate. Thank you. Okay, well, we've had 3 presentations looking at different elements of PPPs. I was quite interested in the second, reflecting on the second presentation from Soren and thinking, well, maybe PPPs, we tend to talk about them as if they're fairly new, but in many respects, perhaps they've been around for some years longer than we actually often think. So let's move then to our 4th presentation. And this presentation is by Ace Christensen, who I believe is joining us from Namibia. I think I got that right. And this is the case for private conveyancing, innovative approaches for land tenure documentation. But this is based upon lessons from Zambia. Is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay, suddenly I had a panic thinking Namibia, Zambia, okay, they're fairly close, but I need to make sure I get the right country here. Okay, so this is going to, in your presentation, I understand you're going to be considering the case for private engagement in the land typing process in Zambia, where innovative approaches, tools utilizing the SDDM framework and bringing on board non-state actors are being utilized in respect of customary land recordation. I will say no more by way of introduction and give the floor over to you. Thank you very much and looking forward to your presentation.
Okay. Good evening, everybody from Namibia. Good day, good morning, good night, good afternoon to all of you, depending on where you are based. As indicated in the introduction, I'll give a bit of a different perspective of PPPs. It is based on a study I have done with 3 of my colleagues, Royal Mabakeng, Elina Theodor, and Farai Shumba. We have done in Zambia. The aim of the study, it was to better understand how alternative and different applications had been used for collection of data and to provide some degree of secure tenure to people. We did that by conducting a workshop where we had a number of participants, both from local institutions, local stakeholders, and also nationally in Zambia, and also from NGOs. We had participants both from local NGOs, but also from international ones, all representing the land sector in Zambia. The workshop was to a large degree based on case studies that were presented by the stakeholders who had been hands-on involved in the various projects. In addition to that, we visited 2 project sites, one with Chief Chamuka and another one in Kanyama settlement in Lusaka. The study was funded by the NELGA network, a network of excellence on land governance in Africa. And it was conducted by myself and my colleagues from Namibia University of Science and Technology in cooperation with Habitat for Humanity Zambia. Okay, in Zambia, they have what is being implemented by the ministry, a systematic land titling process that is ongoing. It's a national project where they intend to register 5 million plots in the period from 2017 to 2021. For that purpose, they have developed a manual, which they're kind of testing by conducting 2 pilot projects. And based on that, they plan to roll it out at a national scale. One of the challenges with this is that the progress has been very, very slow. And also as you see here, the requirements, the standards are relatively high. Boundary surveys are required to be conducted by a licensed land surveyor. They are requested to provide layout plans and survey diagrams, and all of it should be up to a cadastral standard, as we know from developed countries. And also there's a complex regulatory framework guiding the registration. On top of that, the registration is complicated by that all the registrations and surveys has to be approved according to the formal challenge. And there must be a minimum 20% payment, upfront payment by the residents who are going to receive the land certificate. And there is also some reluctance from the residents themselves. And it is partly due to very ambitious goals that were set by the project. And so far they have clearly failed to comply with the goals that they had set due to the high standards, due to very high cost, and of course a low budget. and there is a need for them to reconsider the standards and the way they do the systematic land titling project. And also maybe there's a need to look to make registration mandatory to avoid sporadic registration, which is very costly and often also makes the process take longer. We looked at 5 different projects. The one is, as I mentioned, in the Kanyama Ward 10 settlement in Lusaka. Most of the settlement is sited on state-owned land held under leasehold tenure. It's held by the local authority in Lusaka, and it has been encroached by informal settlers for many years, more than 2 decades or so. They have used the social tenure domain model to record the rights, and there have been a high degree of community participation. It has been a systematic data collection approach that they have applied. And based on the data collected by the residents, the local authority have issued so-called occupancy licenses. The data that has been collected is accessible by all the various departments of the local authority, and the data is also integrated in the local deeds registry, which is kept by the local authority. The local authority consider the data and the whole project very useful, and they use it also for collection of ground rates, and also for installation of basic services such as water and electricity. The approach that they have applied in Kanyama is enshrined in the legal framework, and that means that the rights that are issued to the residents are recognized both at the local level, of course, but also at national and regional level. According to the local authority and also to the local residents, the project has been quite successful, but they are facing challenges in regard to acquiring financing for upscaling and implementing the project in other areas of the informal settlements in Lusaka. The other project that we looked at, or project area that we looked at, is project on customary land in the Sandve chiefdom. It is a project that is implemented by the US aid in 5 different chiefdoms. They use existing images for the data collection, but they do not make physical marks. And also the initial registration, they can initiate the process without people providing ID documents, which is often a challenge in Zambia. Some people do simply not have ID documents. In this project, also the chief and the village head, they are the authority for land administration in communal areas in Zambia. But there is a need for additional training of the community members on the data collection and also in the maintenance of the data. There is little knowledge and experience in how to maintain the data, so there is a clear need for developing the capacity amongst the residents, but also in the chiefdom itself. In addition to that, the recordation is not completed yet, but there seems to be some willingness by local financial institutions to give loans to the residents based on the rights that they acquire via this registration process. Then The next project that we looked at is a project that was implemented by a private organization, an organization called MEDIM. It's based in South Africa, but also implementing projects in several African countries and also on other continents. It's operating both in rural and urban areas. They do identification of the parcels, but they also focus a lot on capturing data, socioeconomic data. And also they kind of interview the residents, and they capture like a testimony on how the land was acquired in order to document the history. They both use a sporadic and a systematic registration approach, and also they update transfers of rights and subdivisions of land parcels and so. MEDIM, they keep the data for the chiefdoms, for the chiefs, until they are ready to manage it themselves. And that there might still be some time until they are actually able to do so. They have been closely involved, but still they need to develop quite a bit of capacity in order to actually manage the records themselves. It is aligned to the needs of the chiefdoms, so how they can make use of the data and for what purposes and what type of rights and so that they provide to the residents. The local councils, they also keep a record and can manage the data for the urban areas. And they also make use of it, and they digitize the spatial data for their own purposes as well. And also they, as we learned from the Kanyama settlement, they have also issued occupancy licenses in this area. However, they have faced some resistance from community members and also from some head persons. Chief Chamuka, he is very supportive and has a lot of focus on providing secure land rights to his community, but there are several other head persons and chiefs in the area who are less keen and less supportive of providing land rights. The MEDIM project started in 2017, a project in the Chamuka chiefdom. It's a bit outside Lusaka, and the purpose was to formalize the land rights. The certificates that are issued, they are recognized both by the Ministry of Lands, but also by a number of financial institutions. It is a project that was implemented in cooperation with the UN Habitat or GLTN. And also here they used the SCDM as the foundation for registration of the rights. There was a high degree of community participation as well. Boundaries were surveyed and also adjudicated. And the maps are kept by the headman and in the chief's palace in order to ease management. You see on the photo here, he has several posters with maps and the different parcels and so. And he shows it very proudly to everybody who is interested in hearing the story. Based on that data, a certificate of customary land occupancy is issued to the residents. And also, normally the banks, they require a title deed in order to provide loans to residents in Zambia. But in this case here in Chamuka, we can also say that it's actually provided a change of the paradigm. Before the titling or registration project, women could actually not possess land rights on their own. So it has clearly empowered women's rights to land. And also they are allocated land rights in their own name and not via their husband or other relatives. And also it has improved how the community members, they see the value of their land. Now they see or consider land in a different way, and that it's something to actually appreciate. There is, however, a concern in the chiefdom that people might still start selling land or using it as a collateral, and that it will over time mean that land is lost from the customary pool of land. But they have several projects within the Tiamook chiefdom. There's one conducted by the Medim, which provides kind of a higher level of tenure security than the one implemented by the UN Habitat and GLTN, that provides a lower level of tenure security to the people. And also in the Medim project, people actually pay to Medim an amount of money to acquire this certificate.
Can I ask 2 minutes, Ace, if you can, please? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. The last project that we looked into, that is a project by Land Alliance in the Pitauka district. It's also in customary on customary land. There is an absence of a state system, and that caused a lot of boundary conflicts and internal conflicts amongst the residents and replacements. The project did not issue land certificates. It only provided secretarial support to the traditional authorities who were responsible for handling the implementation themselves. I won't go into details here. Based on those 5 projects that we looked into, we have some recommendations here. There are several different private operators in land in Zambia. There is no standardization, so each of them, they have their own standards, their own concepts, and ways of dealing, and they register the rights in different systems. So I will just highlight some of our main recommendations, which are to actually set achievable requirements in order to accelerate the provision of tenure security, and also relax on the standards, on the survey standards, so it's more flexible. And also in order to ensure compatibility of the data from the various projects, they are not compatible at the moment, so the different systems cannot talk together. And also there is still a need for quite a level of development of capacity at both national, regional, and local level. And in this regard, the Ministry of Lands could play like a coordinating role to set up a framework so those different systems can actually talk together. And by acknowledging and implementing those different systems, some of them run by private operators, they might be able to actually achieve their goals of land titling in Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ace. Thank you. That's again a fascinating insight into the experience in Zambia. And when I looked at when you were delivering your presentation there, I was thinking in many respects a true public-private partnership that's witnessing collaboration between statutory authorities with grassroots community participation. I think I'd like to pick up on the point you made towards the end there when you were talking about the difference that this has made in terms of tenure security and a changing paradigm. And you touched on women's land rights, which of course extremely important and something that again doesn't always get mentioned in the context of PPPs. So thank you very much for your presentation, and we're getting a few questions coming up, so we will move on and come back to some questions at the end of the sessions. So we now have a final presentation in this particular session from Amelia Velasco Martin Barres from Spain. Again, this is entitled, Finally, the Model of Collaboration Between the Land Surveyor Engineer and the Spanish Directorate General for Cadastre is Institutionalized, a very grand title. So without further ado, I will hand over to Amalia. Thank you.
So thank you to FIG to give me this opportunity, to give us this opportunity to explain our system and also to listen so interesting presentations. So if you can put the presentation, thank you. Okay. Okay, thank you. Can you go to the first one? Okay, so I am Amalia Velasco from the Directorate General for Cadastre, but I am going to explain this agreement that we have between the Cadastre and the Official Corporation of Engineering in Geomatics and Land Surveying with this long title of Spain. So next, please. So in the Spanish system, the agreement to divide parcels and the boundaries are decided by seller and buyer or by the administrative responsible, but not by a land surveyor. We don't have this figure in Spain. It's not obligatory to mark the division in the land, and personally, I think that in most of the case it's not necessary, and in many countries, I think that is a burden that doesn't permit to finish the cadastre. So our law says that it's not obligatory to mark the division in the land. But what is obligatory by law is the incorporation in the cadastre of a new real estate or any alteration of the characteristic of the cadastre, of the real estates. Neither is necessary that a surveyor performs the documentation to present in the cadastre. But any modification of the physical characteristics of the cadastral parcels must be done taking as reference the cadastre. And you can say how you can work with all this system, because we have a complete, for all territory, a cadastre that is digital homogeneous in all the territory. Has been built municipality by municipality for many years, and it has no gaps and not overlaps, and is the official information and legally certain. Is free of charge for everybody, is open to everybody. Everybody can see what is the cadastre, and is editable by several formats and channels, and even editable with the tools of the own system. So the cadastre provides the tools that can change the data of the cadastre when it's possible and easy to change with the tools and with the support of orthophotos and other information that can be used with these tools. All the information of the new parcels must fulfill the technical conditions defined by the cadastre that verifies that the graphical and legal and administrative information is correct before to change the information. Next, please. If there is a change in the boundary of the cadastre, union, segregation, expropriation, or an error or disagreement, citizens and public administrations can, taking as base the cadastre, the GML that we provide to everybody, they can provide an alternative georeferent representation that is used to update the cadastre if it passes the appropriate graphical and technical validation. They can also use the cadastral tools, the cadastral editor, and the graphic validation to provide the new representation. So this new representation that must be provided to the system is checked if it's correct, and if it's correct, all this information is the cadastre, the public administration, who decides to introduce in the cadastre. If someone wants to improve the quality of the cadastral representation, can provide a more accuracy representation, but always with the conformity of the adjoint title holders. So if we provide the basis of a cadastre that, as I told you, was done municipality by municipality in the years 80 and 90, and then if someone wants to improve this, they can make a new representation with these tools and that we provide, and if the title holders that are in the surrounding are agree, it will improve the quality in the cadastre. Next, please. The incorporation of the cadastre can be done by several ways and by several experts, not only land surveyors, other engineers, architects, notaries, property right registrars, depending of the type of real estate and also depending of the act or business that origin this change of data. But the cadastre wants that the land surveyors, engineer that are the specialists in all this area and that manage techniques of accurate capture of topographic data, we want that they are more and more involved in all this process, because we think that is the best way to improve the quality of the cadastral cartography. So the cadastre is seeking the institutionalization of public and private collaboration with the Spanish Official Corporation of Engineering in Geomatics and Land Surveying. For this reason, we signed in 2019 an ambitious new agreement that opens up a series of new methodologies and tools. Next, please. So we did this agreement because before we have in 2007 a first collaboration agreement that has two important items. One was that in the office of the official corporation of the association, we put a cadastral information point. This point has a lot of service, and we have 2,000 or 3,000 in all the territory, because it's the way that the people that cannot access to internet, they can access through this cadastral information point to all the data that is in the cadastre. So we put a special cadastral information point in the official corporation to have certificates or even electronic filing declaration through the electronic office of the cadastral. So it was a point to help all the proceedings with the cadastre. But also we have in 2007 an agreement in the way that the surveyors that they were in the countryside and they could see in the land and they could see errors in when they are doing his work, they can tell us all these errors and disconformities to the cadastre. So in 2019, after so many years to have this agreement, we decided to give it to do a step further in the collaboration. Next, please. And why we did this? Because in 2015, we have a new law. The new law, in Spain, the cadastre and the land register are two different institutions, and they do different mission and functions, and they are the two necessary to have well described the properties. The cadastre is obligatory, the land register is voluntary, but if you want to be in front of thirds, you must go to the land register to make the publicity. So we think that we need to collaborate between the two of them, and the new law said, because the land register traditionally has only literal descriptions, and in the year 2015, by law, they decide that any change has to be done taking as base the cadastre, and the cadastre will give the coordinates of the properties to the land register, and then the properties that they are with the coordinates of the cadastre in the land register, they will be coordinates. And in this way, we are going to improve all our description, and in this way, the surface and the coordinates of the properties will be the ones that they are in the cadastre and the representation. So this new law in the 2015 make important to have an agreement with the Association of Land Surveyors. And then in this new agreement, we establish a standardized procedure to communicate to the cadastre variation of the graphic and literal information. And also we have done and we are doing joint capacity and training plans, and we will establish new functionalities in this cadastral information point that I told you. So next, please. So what is new? In the information reaching to the cadastre, if the information that the land surveyors give to the cadastre complies with a number of conditions, such as files, might be processed by means of abbreviation procedure. So if we train in the land surveyors and we define a good set of documentation, we will do an abbreviated, we are doing now, an abbreviated procedure. Land surveyor, after all the measurements in the field, through the tools that they are available in the electronic office of the cadastre, he can obtain and standardize document for the adjoint cadastral holders to sign their consent and a graphical validation report. So any surveyor that is in the field and must change the definition of the parcels, they will get through the cadastral virtual office a document to the neighbors to join, to sign that they are agree, and a graphical validation report that say if the information that they provide can go inside the cadastre if they have the legal and economic and the good. Sorry, the presentation went out. Okay.
Okay, I think we're also needing to come to conclusion, please, Amelia, because we're running on time. Thank you.
Yes, but I cannot see the presentation.
No, I cannot.
So, okay, if I cannot see the presentation, I will tell you that this agreement is the first time that we have a real public and private partnership with the Association of Land Surveyors in a very clear system, because we have, the cadastre has a lot of agreements with public organization, but not with private organization. And this is the first time that we have this agreement very clear signed. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much, Amelia, for your presentation. And again, very interesting to hear of these developments in Spain and how you see this. I like the title where you say, finally, the model of collaboration. And obviously, this has been quite a journey. But again, you illustrated, I think, how this collaboration has matured from the original agreement in 2017 with a new agreement being signed in 2019. And how the new parameters for the collaboration between private and public entities has been formed, analyzing methodologies and tools that you used. You gave us detail of that. I'm sorry that we had to rush towards the end. There's never enough time in these sessions. But I want to allow some time for presentation, for some Q&A. Just one point of detail there. I only gave reference to yourself, Amalia, and Martin, but I believe there were 3 or 4 other contributors to the paper: Carmen, Jesus, and Juan Carlos Manrique. So I must correct myself there. It was a collective effort. So thank you very much for that. I'm conscious that time is running very short. I'm also conscious that there are probably some football fans participating that are mentioned the European Championships at the beginning, but we do have some that I would like to, maybe that we can take and put back to the panel. And so I think maybe we could start with quite an open question. I think this was posed by Jaap Zavenbergen from the Netherlands, and Kenneth has already got his Danish football shirt on, so that's adding a little bit more pressure to me as the chairman. Okay, let's. A question was posed about the success of PPPs and relating that to the motto of the Sustainable Development Goals, which Jaap has proposed that the motto of SDGs is "Leave no one behind," but has also proposed that public land administration has not managed to do this in many places, i.e. leave no one behind. People have been left behind. What difference do we think public-private partnerships will make? That's quite a tough question to start with, maybe. So the motto of the SDGs is leave no one behind. It's proposed that we haven't actually achieved that through public and land administration. What difference do we think PPPs will make in terms of the achievement of the SDGs?
Well, I guess I can start, John, just to kick things off.
To get things going.
And then I'll pass over to maybe Kenneth and Soren, who really did concentrate on the SDGs. But I guess the idea behind public-private partnerships to some extent is is that you can price these things and, you know, use economics as your basis for driving it. So I know in the energy sector, they've used the idea behind, rather than charging for energy or pricing energy, but pricing energy efficiency, with the idea that you're trying to achieve energy efficiency rather than energy usage. And I think the same thing can happen with land administration to some extent, where we're trying to actually achieve geographic coverage. We're not necessarily trying to achieve only the inclusion of certain elements. And I think that that's where partnerships with the World Bank and development partners in particular can come in to help provide those incentive mechanisms that can ultimately achieve that.
Kate, Soren or Kenneth, would you like to add anything to that, please?
Maybe I could contribute that the public-private partnership can give something with the knowledge, the extra capacity building, which may be a lack in a country where they want to establish a land administration system. That you can bring in the knowledge and the skills to the government and the administration.
Yeah, and I could also add a comment on that, because I think the private sector contributions are really essential. I think that we also have a capacity of manning up and manning down, meaning that we can extract the exact right resources to a project whenever it's needed. I think that's a very powerful contribution.
Thank you. Ace, you were also signaling you wanted to add there.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at our small project in Zambia, I think it's a quite good indication of what might happen when the government or the ministries are not able to deliver. Then we see, you know, private companies starting projects in cooperation with local residents and local governance, simply because there is a need and people are very much aware of the value of land rights today.
Do you think that sometimes, though, you know, I've seen that in other parts of the world where, you know, the private sector fills a gap, if you like, but then there's always the challenge of getting that accepted, or sometimes the challenge of getting that accepted by the government entities.
That's true, but I mean, at some extent, you know, when you see it in many different places in the country, I would expect the government cannot keep ignoring it. I mean, they must realize that there is a need. And I mean, in my opinion, they should also come up with some standards so you can kind of, the different systems can talk together.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you have different enclaves, you know, where you have different systems and they are all separate.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, sure. I think that's certainly a challenge. Kenneth, I'll bring you in. I think you wanted to add to that, and then maybe I'll come to Amelia.
Exactly. Because what we see when we talk about international projects, it's like when a private company comes in, we're in it for the money, and that's why I'm addressing the corporate social responsibility, because I think that there's a higher purpose for this. We have 9 years to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. And for 34's sake, of course, we need to fund some money around this, but we have a higher purpose, and that's what I try to illustrate. That if this is about money, we will keep talking for the next 5 years without doing anything. So we need to do it with our hearts, and we need to be there. We need to be there now.
Thank you, Amelia, please.
Yes, it's more a question than other thing, because how you keep the responsibility in the public sides, because sometimes the private take more initiative and more, but the responsibility must be always in the public sides. So how you ensure this?
Okay, thank you. Maybe I can just link in with a point there, because a practical question was posed by Rosamund Assar, and this is concerning consensus decision-making in public-private partnerships. And when we enter into these agreements, touching on this possible potential tension between the public and the private sector, what, in the experience of those on the panel, who makes the final decision? Who is the final arbiter when on PPPs?
Must be public. Must be the
yes. Okay.
government.
Sure. I guess you were going to say that based on following on from what you just said. So maybe anyone else got a view on that? Soren?
No, I can totally agree with Amelia. It's of course the public, and the private companies has to fit in there.
Yeah, I think this comes back to that land conceptualization tool that I was talking about a little bit, John, which you, of course, are quite familiar with as well, where really it's the government seeking support from the private sector, with the legitimization from the public, say, so they fundamentally have the ultimate say, but the sharing of responsibilities and risks and roles fundamentally comes down to that conceptualization and that contract that is achieved, or agreement that is achieved between the public and the private sector. So that's where you're sort of negotiating Amalia's questions to some extent, and working out who's bearing what risk, who's bearing what guarantees, who's bearing what responsibilities in that regard. And I think there can be some sharing there, and then that relates to your remuneration and your incentive mechanisms.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Amelia, did you want to add?
I think that must be a trust between the public and the private in the two sides. That must be trust.
Certainly, yeah, and I think definitely Kenneth's comment comes in here really well, where we always think of the private sector, as being money grabbing and money hungry and only in it for profit, and I think that is fundamentally untrue. I mean, certainly there are some companies that are in that category, but there's a lot of companies that either willingly are moving into this CSR and this heart space, but there's perhaps others that are maybe less willingly being dragged in there because of the younger generation, or because of incentive and global policy mechanisms. So I think there's definitely a push there, and that heart element has to come in. And I really appreciated Kenneth's comment, and I think I wrote this in the private chat, around thinking about the SDGs as an innovation catalogue. I really like that comment. I think that the more businesses that can think around these things flexibly and think of them as opportunities rather than measures that are maybe limiting them, that's really important.
Thank you, Kate. There was also a comment which was interesting for me from a sort of land titling background, where someone was saying that ultimately the risk is all on the state, because most land titling systems have state guarantees. So you get a title, and I'm not sure if this was a question, but it poses the question of where does the risk lie with the private sector if ultimately the state is the guarantor of a land title? Any thoughts on that one?
Well, my answer to that was that it's not just about the risk of guaranteeing the title, right? Like, and you're talking about large scale projects in terms of improving a cadastre. There's a lot of risk in terms of introducing technology, in terms of cost overruns, maintaining sustainably the capacity that's necessary. So those are the kinds of risks that the private sector is maybe taking on, whilst the public sector is bearing the risk of a principle of guarantee if they're doing it. And a lot of countries, I don't think all countries are doing it. There's definitely countries I've worked in that aren't doing it. And where they are doing it, they're often requiring an additional fee to help to ultimately fund that future guarantee. So that risk can, to some extent, be managed by the private sector through an insurance type mechanism. So it can be outsourced as well.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Okay, now I'm not sure if there are any other questions. Those were three that I saw and quickly jotted down. Are you aware of any other
I think there was another one from Yarp. There's one directly for Asa, which was, can you please give some more details of the leasehold interest granted upon conversion of customary land, and are there freehold titles?
In Zambia, they do not have freehold titles. In 75, all freehold land rights, they were relegated to 99 years of statutory leases. But they do have different types of leasehold rights. Some of them are valid for 10 years, like an occupancy right. It's renewable. And also there is a 14-year leasehold period for unsurveyed land. Then there is a longer term period, 25 to 30 years, for residential settlements and so, and issued by the local authority. And the longest term you can hold a leasehold is 99 years. And this is what they consider full certificate of title. They kind of consider it as a freehold title. But I mean, from a legal or a formal perspective, it's not similar to a leasehold title.
Okay, thank you, Essay. I hope that was not a question, I think, from Keith Scott, which I've now just seen. So apologies for that, but thank you for that.
And there was one more question from Jaap, John, if you wanted to address that.
I haven't.
So I think it's the one question that it was in two separate comments. Apologies, Jaap, if it's not. He writes, where should the added value be open and where commercial? And he says, e.g., the EU and before US Freedom of Information Act put a lot of focus on open data and beyond, e.g. open science, at least for the public sector. So how does that work within PPP constructions? So I'm happy to jump in and answer that one, but I'll leave it for Soren or Kenneth or Amalia to also jump in first. No.
Okay, you come in with some thoughts, and then we'll pick it up, and then yeah.
So I guess I wrote something down, which was that certainly a lot of registries are already profitable. So I guess it's not just about the value-added services, but the fundamental role of the registry, and that even with Freedom of Information Acts, they're still profitable. So I think there's a balance between open data and for sale data, in particular, where there's a significant effort that's been put into the data analysis. So it might be a case of making, all data available fundamentally when it's the raw data or the original data, but the value add comes in terms of that data analysis, and that's perhaps what can be for sale by the private sector. And then I think also it's not just about data, but it's also about services. So there's other things that you can charge for beyond data to be profitable, in terms of whether it's this protection or guarantee, in terms of the registration and management, or sort of the services that governments would typically provide that they typically fund through municipal financing, such as land values and taxation. So that was my quick response.
No, I think that the cadastral data is so fundamental, and the land must be open and transparent as possible, always with data protections. And I think that must be free of charge as possible, because it's the basic for many things. And to get a real transparent system, you must be open and free of charge, I think.
Thank you.
I think I agree with that, Amalia, but is your cadastre in Spain, is it profitable?
Yeah, no, it's totally free of charge for everything.
So there's no generation of revenue for that?
No, the government understands that. The government understands that every time that he puts a euro in the cadastre, is a lot of benefits for the public and for.
So I mean, that's probably something that we need to be articulating better as an industry as well, because I guess certainly in the countries that I've been working in, really we're working on the basis that you're convincing the government to invest because of this return on investment. Mm-hmm. And you're either articulating that directly because they can charge for registry services, or you're trying to develop this economic discussion around this is your return on investment that's not direct and it's not obvious, but this is how you can calculate it. So I think there's definitely some more reporting that perhaps needs to be done. And I'd love to hear some more cases from Spain in that context.
We are a fiscal cadastre, and our values, cadastral values, are the basic for the real property taxation, and is the main income in the municipalities. So you know that when you put a money in the cadastre, it's a money in the municipality. We did an study, and in the last revision that we put, €1 become 17 euro in the municipality tax. So is an important inversion in the with a lot of results in a country.
Thank you. Very interesting, actually, because the whole debate around paying for government has arisen again, of course, in the post-COVID world that we're now living in, and certainly excuse me, been on the agenda here in terms of, you know, return on investment is talked about now in the context of most government initiatives. Again, conscious of time, let me just report on our poll because we've had some responses. So the poll asked the future of public-private partnerships in land administration, the view of participants towards ongoing utilization of PPPs, and I see that the use and approach will largely remain unchanged, got 2 votes. I think Kenneth will be happy to hear that PPPs will evolve with greater focus on matters such as social responsibility and environmental sustainability, received 10 votes. And PPPs will be replaced by new models of collaboration and partnership. It was 3 votes. Now, I'm conscious that time has moved on and football matches have started. And so there's an Ask Me Anything session for further discussion, and the URL, the link, is now on the screen. So I guess that will continue immediately after this session. Is that how things work? Someone give me a nod.
Yeah, so we should all join that link as well, and then that's how we continue.
I can join that link, that's fine. But if anyone needs to be excused, I will understand why. So without further ado, I'd just like to say, as chairman, I had to sort of step in fairly last minute on this, but it's been great to be involved again with FIG. I think I shared with Kate that it's probably been something like 16 or 17 years since my last appearance at an FIG meeting, a conference. And so thanks very much to FIG. Thanks very much to Mila for the support, which has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you to all of the presenters. I'm sorry that we never have enough time to get into the detail and discuss some of the points that have been raised to the full, but I'm sure it's given a flavor. All of the presentations, etc., are available online with the slideshows and so on. So I'm sure that there will be plenty more discussion in coming weeks and months and future conferences on PPPs and how they change and evolve. So thank you very much to everyone for your contributions and for staying with the time frame. We've overrun slightly, but I think it's been a fruitful session. And if we've missed any questions, then apologies also to those posing them, but we can pick this up maybe in the Ask Me Anything session after the discussion. So
thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good luck with the football.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Kate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. I say bye. Sorry.